Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conejo Valley Visionaries, a weekly podcast spotlighting the people and stories behind your favorite Conejo Valley businesses. I'm your host, Christina Denstead. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Michael McCrary, the founder and CEO of PureSpectrum, a premier market research technology company headquartered in Westlake Village. Celebrating its 10-year anniversary this year, Michael has built PureSpectrum from a single desk at Hub 101 into a leader in the data collection industry with more than 200 employees globally. Join us as we dive into his journey from corporate leadership to entrepreneurship, the importance of company culture in growing a thriving business, and the simple advice for anyone interested in going out on their own. If you enjoy this episode and find value in the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and rating. This helps more people find the podcast, and therefore each story can reach more folks in the Conejo Valley. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Michael. Hey, Michael. Welcome to Conejo Valley Visionaries.
Hi, Christina. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am thrilled to get you on the podcast. You came highly recommended from our previous guest, Dean Gerhard. I guess it actually is a doctor too, isn't he?
Yes,
Anyways,
doctor too.
Yes, he is. And he actually made me aware of yourself and PureSpectrum when I visited Hub 101. So I know that there is some backstory on how that all is connected, which I can't wait to get into. But first and foremost, as we like to do on the podcast, is take it back. And what did you want to be when you grew up? What did you end up studying in school?
Okay. So thanks again for having me on. I wanted to be a professional golfer. You noticed the golf trip today. I fell very far short of that. But as a kid, I grew up playing golf with my dad, which is great. I love to be able to have the memories of the time doing that. But I actually, outside of the dream wish of being a professional athlete, which I think a lot of kids do, um, you know, coming out of like high school and into college, I always was really into sales. I enjoyed and loved talking to people and involved in school leadership and things of that nature and college as well. So I think people often think of sales now as like kind of a dirty word. Like they think of like you're selling something to somebody maybe they don't need. But I was always really okay with it. So I didn't know exactly what field I wanted to be in. My family was in a field that, in like publishing and printing and advertising, that field, which is where I ended up starting in the family business. But um, there was no like I want to be a architect or it's something that would be very easy to describe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because you're right. I think sales doesn't seem like maybe something that you have as an aspiration, but if you're naturally good with people, and that kind of comes natural, such a great skill that, can apply to so many different industries.
Yeah, yeah. I think ultimately, as you get along in your career, everybody's somewhat in sales in the company,
Of course.
right? So, but I was just never shy about it. I was
Okay.
like, I'm okay with trying to sell something and get somebody to buy it. And
And did you have any, high school age jobs where you were in sales? Like, for example, I was at the
I
Gap,
mean,
so, I was
some people would say I came out of the womb selling, right? That
okay.
like it was always, but not necessarily. I mean, my it was a small family business, right? It
Mhm.
was local publishing house and guides. And when I went to college, I kind of worked part time in the business, and I was not really old enough to be in professional because it was B2B sell, right? But the moment I got out of college, I was like, okay, I want to go sell advertising for the
Mhm.
magazine.
Okay.
And so but there wasn't like I worked at Nordstrom selling something or,
Yeah.
it was actually probably a lot more like working construction, and like mowing lawns and things of that
Yeah.
nature, the service reminding me why I wanted to be in sales, right?
Okay.
Like, not being outdoors and working 10-hour days. So I wanted
Yeah.
to be in a professional setting.
Did you grow up here? Was your family business based out in the Conejo Valley?
No, I moved out here in 2005, was born in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
Lived there till I was 11 years old. And then my family moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's where I did what I would call the formative years. So I was, middle school through college in the
Yeah.
Carolinas. And then from there went to New York because I was in advertising and publishing and left my family's business. It was like, well, if you're going to be in publishing and advertising, you have to go to New York. So went there in early 2000s and did not like the weather. It was very cold.
Yes, it is.
The city was fun to work in, but the opportunity came for me to move out here in 2005, and I took it and haven't looked back.
Okay. What were you doing advertising for? Printed for magazines, for books?
Yeah.
What kind of advertising?
Yeah, it was print.
Okay.
So, my family's business was just, like in the grocery stores, these apartment guides or new home
Of course.
guides,
Yes.
right? So that was what my family did in the South and, North Carolina and whatnot. And then when I moved to New York, I actually was selling, national consumer print advertising. Ultimately ended up working at Meredith Corporation, and they are still around. This is early 2000s. So their big titles were like Better Homes and Gardens, Tradition, all these, home sort of magazines. And the magazine I worked for was Midwest Living, which is kind of like
Fantastic.
Sunset or Southern Living, but for the Midwest,
Yeah.
which was not the easiest ad sell when you're selling to, ad agencies in New York. Like, I don't understand why do I need the Midwest? Which is kind of how I ended up getting into the industry I'm in, because although it was a fantastic publication, gorgeous, great editorial, good, I kind of had to use data, right?
Yeah.
Just to say, like, look at, okay, these are all the places you
Interesting. Right.
advertise, and you're missing the Midwest.
Yeah.
And you're under indexing to the Midwest. And oh, by the way, there's higher home ownership in the Midwest. There's more disposable income in the Midwest, more, all of these sort of things. So I became very comfortable with using a data element on top of, like, hey, and look, like, it would belong here, right?
It's
Like your
beautiful.
product
Yeah.
would look really nice in this magazine. So that's how I kind of got into the industry I'm in, because it was, 2002, 2003, you're selling print advertising. There's this thing called the internet, right?
Absolutely.
It's
Yes.
coming around. I
For
was like,
those
I
that are
don't,
aware,
I
there
don't
were
think the
magazines.
future's very bright for magazines.
Yes.
And it was very hard to figure out, like, where was the direction of travel for advertising going to go. You knew it was going to go online,
Hmm.
and it has predominantly. There's very little, like, small share of money in print advertising now.
Yeah.
But it was so fragmented and balkanized, and everybody wanted to have a website and a sales team. Um, and so I actually ended up not staying in advertising, and got into this very interesting industry that I found myself into.
Okay. So it is also interesting, just taking one step back. I was in New York at that time too, but I was working in PR. So I was on the other side of the business a little bit. And it is interesting to think about something like a Midwest Living back then, which was like very regional and maybe was sort of looked down upon in a way because it was so niche. But now those are the magazines that have survived.
I
In
know.
my liking, it's like these very specific niche down publications that are like intended for one audience, but you can really go all deep in it. And it's just interesting, I think, to see how that world has evolved over the past 20 years.
I know. And now obviously it's very niche,
Yeah.
right? Everything has a very targeted audience. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think they did survive. I haven't actually read Midwest Living in a number of years, but
Sure.
sure it's still out there.
So tell us, you got here, you had an opportunity to move to California in 2005. What was the opportunity?
As I'm trying to figure out how not to sell print advertising,
Hmm.
I end up going into an industry, which is the online survey market research business. And all of that data that I used to talk about, over indexes and home ownership, and they spend more money on retail products, all of that underlying was built by survey data.
Right.
And I learned that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, this is coming from people answering surveys. And through a connection of friend to friend, there was a new company being built out, because online surveys and online sampling was a new thing. I was like, why not?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it seems like it's a B2B sell, and I understand a little bit about it, but you didn't have to be some market research specialist to get into the field. So I get the job at a company that no longer exists. It's since been bought and sold a few times. Greenfield Online, and I started off just as a salesperson. And that trajectory was, I was pretty good at it, right? So I always had an ambition of like, okay, well, I want to become a sales leader, sales manager. So I became, eligible for that, and there was an opening to become the West Coast regional vice president for
I
Greenfield
see.
Online. And because I was not from New York and that area, the New York, Fairfield County, New York area, I hated the cold. Just did not like how cold it was, and I just didn't have any family in the Northeast, and it just wasn't my home. So I
Yeah.
was like, I, I'd moved to California to take that job.
Hmm.
So I got that job, and it was at the time it was my wife and I had only been married a few years, and we had a baby. He was born 4 months before we moved, and then we were like, yeah, we're gonna go out there, and it's gonna be warm, it's gonna be sunny, and it has been.
Yes, it's lived up to that.
Yeah.
That's great. And what an incredible opportunity. So you started working for them when you were in the city in New York, and then were able to kind of take this big leap into leadership by moving out to the West Coast.
Correct. Yeah. So I come out here. This is 2005. And as I talk to young employees in the business, and they're like, "What do we do to be able to have career directories?" And I'm like, listen, you're not going to be me. I'm not going to be you. But I was always just super ambitious. I always wanted to know, like, what did I need to do to take the next step,
Yeah.
including moving across the country, including moving from North Carolina to New York. I even moved to New Orleans at one point for 2 years in my
Yeah.
journey. It's like I was willing to do almost anything
Yeah.
to take the next steps to build my career. So you should come to the office.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Um, this
That was,
joke.
well, I see. I see. Yes. In
Yeah.
terms of remote versus
Yeah. So
not.
you should be willing to drive 15 minutes to come to the office. It's not that big a
Yes.
deal if you want to really do your career. So the from there, like getting out here, the next step was how do you become the U.S. manager,
Okay.
right? And after a couple of years, I got that opportunity. And it was a pretty big job. I mean, it was probably a $65 million budget. 25 people in sales. But I learned just so much about going from being an individual contributor to then managing a small team of call it 7, 8 people,
Yeah.
to then everybody that I was a peer with. I had to manage the people that used to be my friends that I'd go to lunch with, and how do you maintain that relationship while being their leader manager. So the progression was a lot of fun, and as I say, like incremental, but that's the set the foundation, like for to continue to build and to build the confidence and expertise to where I ultimately got to, was to
Yeah.
start this business.
Well, and you must have really liked that industry because, to be fair, you're in this print advertising, and then you moved over to data, and now you've been in there ever since. So what was it that drew you to online surveys and that kind of data?
This opportunity,
Really, it was just
right?
the
Yeah, there's no real like deep passion for statistics and market
yeah.
research. That was never part of the reason I got in the industry. It was all about opportunity. And I ended up falling in love with the industry, mainly because the people that I get to work with,
Yeah.
and it has really been innovative. And it's funny, I have to give a talk at a conference in just a few weeks, and they want me to talk about innovation for 15 minutes. And it dawned on me that I've been part of online samples since almost the beginning of it,
That's what I
which made me
understand. It's
feel,
really cool.
I'm not gonna lie, like I felt a little old. I was like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, like I've been in this industry like 22, 23 years now. And it only started in like 2000. I got in it in 2003.
Yeah.
I was like, I've been here since the beginning of this particular industry.
Well, and it
But
is wild to think that surveys were happening just via paper
pen,
mailing that you
paper, telephone, mall intercept, all these things still exist, right?
okay.
You still get phone calls for surveys. You
Yeah.
still get paper surveys from time to time. But the, like, but that was the only way it got done until 2000, and then
Right.
now it's just a very small fraction of the way it gets done.
Right. And it sounds like, okay, well, I want to talk about obviously how Pure Spectrum came to be, but even when it comes to innovation and technology, it sounds like you guys are in a lot of ways leading that evolution. And just with all the new advent of AI and all these resources in the past 20 years, I can only imagine where online surveying is now. But let's go back to where you are leading this team at this opportunity out here. And then what happens? You then go off on your own and decide you want to become an entrepreneur and start up on your own?
So that was probably about the time where I started thinking about, I wonder if I could start a business. But this is still, we're talking 2012, 2013,
Mm-hmm.
2011, like that early 2010s. And no, the next thing I did was I took another job. And that next job was to help another company in this industry that was very focused on bringing technology to how we were operating into they were a European business, and I got the opportunity to be the managing director of North America. So it was more responsibility. It was, okay, you're not just running sales, you get a purview over everything in the operations to help launch a North American business. And it was super small business, like a fraction of the size of the revenue and people that I have. I was like, okay, like this is going to be a great place for me to learn that next step. And I did not stay at that company very long. It was only about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I love the founder of that business. I love what they were doing. I learned a ton about being an American, especially one that like in California and wanting to go fast. And this was like a Scandinavian owned company, and we were not on the same speed.
Culturally
It was
different
culturally very different,
approach.
right? I
Yes.
learned a lot about culture and the
Yeah.
importance of culture. Still love the founder. He's no longer involved in the business. And that business has done just fine without me, as all of them do. Um, so we go there for about a year and a half. And then I get my next opportunity, which is to join an American, very early stage, like 1 year in company as its president, which, you know, I respect now after founding a business that the founder is the founder and they take the overwhelming lion's share of risk. Like there's risk in joining an early phase company for the early employees, but that risk is a different profile for the founder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I joined there. That's the company that was headquartered in New Orleans. I worked remotely. There was, small office here, but mainly in New Orleans. And again, it was almost sidestep up because I wasn't like running operations. Like, so I kind of went back to being more like a chief revenue officer, even though it was called president.
Okay.
But I was, one of a few people in the executive suite of, uh, early stage funded startup, and learned a little bit more about that process. But that was about 4 years. I actually moved my family to New Orleans for 2 years, which was a really fun experience. But it was, I was ready to come home.
Yeah.
Right. It was a great place to visit and
Yeah.
work for a couple of years. Lovely people, but there's a lot of bugs, very humid, even though I grew up in the South. It sounds like I'm just like a fair weather
No,
worker
I
here, right?
appreciate that though,
Yeah.
because so I mean, I think that's probably why a lot of people have ended up here, frankly.
Yeah, no,
There's
there's
no
something to
other.
it.
Yes.
Um, but that brings us to 2015,
Yeah.
and me and my family moved back out here. I basically done my 4 years there, where I'm vested, fully vested. I was an early stage investor there, and that was the crossroads of, all right, am I actually ready to try and start a
Hmm.
business? And I'd been talking about it, to my wife, like I really feel like I want to do this. I really want to like do this for more and more and more and more over the years. And, I, I had this moment in time, like, and it was finally, November, December 2015.
Hmm.
I'll just never forget her saying listen, like, this is the moment.
Oh.
Like, I'm not telling you you cannot talk about it anymore if you don't do it, but you kind of do it or don't, and
Yeah.
then like come to peace with the decision that you're going to make here. And after a lot of thought, a lot of figuring things out, I ultimately said, yes, I'm going to start a business. And it was literally just like the last two companies I'd worked for were both like technology, research technology around buying and selling online sample. And I was like, well, I'm just going to build a competitor,
Okay.
right? I'm not the most innovative, smartest, brightest guy in the world. I was like, I know there's a product market fit.
Yeah.
I know how the customers are buying, how I think they're going to buy in the future. Technology wise, I'm not a guy that knows how to. I couldn't tell you how to get to the code in this company. I wouldn't even know what website to go to, right? I'm not a technology coder sort of guy. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And in hindsight, like it is so risky, right? I had three kids, still hadn't sold my house that I had to buy in New Orleans because
Yeah.
they wouldn't rent to somebody that had three dogs, and, had a house here that we never sold and rented out while we were gone. But with the support of my wife and over time building up enough of a nest egg to be like, okay, I can give this a couple year run without and pulled the trigger. I think the number that is December 17th, 2015. Wrote a little check, filed corporate papers. Was like, all right, I'm doing this. And then you're
Perfect.
like, now what?
Right.
Right?
Totally. Well, and it's interesting, not to interrupt, but you are the first founder that I've interviewed for this podcast who was creating a tech company, not
Right.
not a physical restaurant or space or even a service business. This is a different style of company, of brand, and a little less tangible. Obviously, you had the
Yeah.
institutional
There's a
knowledge,
lot
you
of
have the
intangible
sales
to it. Yeah.
background, you had all these things, but you're going to have to build a team to create the thing, right? You're not just going to be able to like fully launch it on your own. So,
Correct.
right. So, what is the first step when you do that? I mean, congratulations first, because that's such a bold move. And I love to hear when the spouse is the one who sort of pushes you over the edge. But
Yes. She was
yeah,
absolutely there, right
yeah.
beside me. I'll say, not pushing me, but maybe
Okay.
beside me.
Yes. Encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
what is a first step in something like that?
you, if you're a technology company founder who's not a coder, like you got to get a couple things. One, you need to figure out your money because you're gonna have to pay people to do things, and some of that's I have money. Others like I'm gonna need more money,
Yeah.
right? And then the other is like, well, who's gonna help me build technology? And so you just have to go back through your network of people that you've worked with and then try to convince them, hey, would you like to co-found this with me? Which nobody wanted to.
Hmm.
Um, or, okay, will you consult with me? Will you help me? I'll pay you, right? And so I had a guy I had worked with before at one of the prior companies who lived in LA. He had chosen not to go back to LA, to New Orleans when we all were kind of like called to New Orleans in 2013. And he was like, yeah, I'll help you. Like I was like, great, because I don't know how to do this. I know what I wanted to do,
Right.
but I don't actually know how to make that turn into technology that works. So you got to find somebody if you're going to do that to help with the tech. It is a modern day miracle that it actually ever went live. And I
Mm,
really do give credit to the guy who helped out in the beginning. His name is Suresh. Um, because like that's what fails a lot of these tech companies. You either are some sort of techie that knows how to build an app or a website, but you don't actually have the business acumen or understand how to get demand for it.
right.
Or you're a guy like me that knew how the buying and selling went, had the connections, could at least get stuff going, but you have very little chance of success in actually getting a technology stood up.
Yeah.
So to like that was a huge, I'll call it stroke of luck, but like the fact that one person was available that lived out here that I'd worked with before, and we picked a development shop in India, which I'd never been to India, never worked with this team before, but we interviewed them, and I was like, I don't know, you tell me, are they good? I don't know. Um, and it's still, for that to actually go well enough to be able to launch a product that didn't even launch until October 2016. That stroke of luck. I
It
don't know.
sounds like luck, trust, relationship building, a lot of,
Yeah, the network matters.
things that have put into it. Now, what was the crux of that original idea of the business? And was it called Pure Spectrum then?
Always
And
PureSpectrum.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, like most companies, the domain was available, so that helped with the naming.
Yep.
Um, to me, the word pure gives a feeling of clean,
Hmm.
right? Like it's so people are buying data from our system, so it's like pure is good.
Yeah.
Spectrum, we have a lot of different publishers' websites, places that people are getting data from. So a spectrum of places you're getting, and that's kind of like how the name came about, and the domain was available. So we're 2000, basically January 2016. We're at a pretty small house, right, and kids, and so that's how I ended up at Hub 101. I
Got
was
it.
like, I need a place to go. Like, I don't do well with distractions. It's hard enough for me to focus anyway, much less have anything else that can take me away from the thought process I'm on.
Yeah.
So I'm literally looking at like Regis and other these places. I'm like, there's got to be something better than that.
Yeah.
And Hub 101 was called Huddle House at
Hmm.
that point in time.
I did not know
And
that.
I call and they don't pick up. So I'm like, well, let me just drive around. Like, I lived in Oak Park. Let me just drive over there. And I drive over there. I'm like, do y'all rent spaces? And they're like, no, we don't, because we used to be called Huddle House, but it's going to be, it wasn't even named Hub 101 at that point. Like, it's now going to be run, managed, operated by Cal Lutheran University.
Right.
And I was like, great. The space looks really cool. It's got kind of that tech company vibe, and it's got the look and feel that I'm kind of thinking, how much does it cost for me to have a desk here? And they're like, we don't know, but you're welcome to come work here for free until we figure it out. I'm like, that's perfect.
That's even better.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's an absolute truth, but I think I'm the first ever paying member of Hub 101.
I believe that's what I understand as well. At least we'll
I
go with
don't know. There were some other people that were
that. Okay.
lurking around there. I mean, there's a couple folks that, but I don't know. Like, so I'm definitely a single digit person. It's a
Yes.
top three. I'm a podium finisher, I think, for first in there. But that's that was a great spot for me to go and to be able to focus, do things. I don't know. There are people honking nonstop out there,
I,
by the way.
I can't even
Um,
hear. It's good.
well, you will. So the the design of the whole like initial application, like I met the person who did that, like because he's at a desk. And I'm like, what do you do? And he's like, I'm a UX UI designer working on, but I'm trying to build this business. I'm like, it turns out I actually really need to know a UX UI designer. Can we
Yeah.
talk? So I made connections down there, and 10 years later, we almost had the same UX UI. Little known fact, you should not change how things work in a B2C application or B2B application because people don't like change. So
Right.
if you actually get it right in the beginning, then you can make modifications.
Well, it
I
is
had
very
bang.
clean too. And so, for those who maybe are listening and are not familiar with Hub 101, just quickly, Hub 101 is a co working space, maybe the only one out here in like the Westlake Conejo Valley area, and now is run by Cal Lutheran. And we talked about a little bit when Gerhard Eppeltaler was on the show. And what you're saying is you were there just to sort of like get the business off the ground, but one of the kind of benefits of being in that space is you get to connect with other
Yep.
folks who you might need to learn from or,
Or hire.
hire,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
I hired this. He wasn't full time, but like my UX UI designer came from there. It just gave us a place to go to. Like I needed to hire employees. I
Yeah.
needed, and this is when people believe that they should come to the office all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I have a space, right? You can come to work here. And also the like just the support, right? We were like starving artists basically all in your first year of startups. Everybody's like, oh, this is going, oh, that's not going well.
Yeah.
But just to have a community of people that are all at some stage of trying to figure out how to launch a business,
Yeah.
I think it's helpful.
Yeah. That's incredible. Just go back to it. You saw that you're going to make a competitor business. What was the like point of differentiation? And have you managed to like stick with that throughout the past 10 years of running Pure Spectrum?
Yeah, it wasn't it wasn't really crazy. It was, I'm going to focus on the technology that I'm going to offer to the market being super simple and clean UX UI.
Hmm.
Because one of them that I'd worked at was not, and I knew that from people telling me in my position there, like this thing's really hard to use. I was like, okay, I'm going to do better than that.
Yeah.
And the other one that I'd worked at before had a very, very, I thought, bloated economic model, right? So it wasn't very marketplace like margins. So I was like, I'm going to have a very strong emphasis on UX, UI. I'm going to have very simple pricing the way things are being
Mm.
offered to the market. And then we're going to invest a lot into the actual the data cleanliness that we deliver to our customers, because online surveys ultimately are people who are willing to take a survey and being offered something like an incentive,
Yeah,
right? So there's opportunity for fraud and even people from other countries pretending like they're from the US taking
totally.
the surveys. So just a heavy emphasis on quality of what we were delivering. And so it's quality, simplicity, price, and that was like these are the pillars and the foundation of the business, and we're still the same three, right? We added innovation into it, but that's made a nice acronym for us. But like really, all the lens that we look through everything has always been through those, and it's I think people imagine things as like overnight, like, oh my gosh, boom, like success. Like you just have to keep, if you have that, that where you're going and how you plan to get there, and just that don't change everything all along the way. Now, if you've got it wrong, obviously you need to course correct. But like
Yeah.
I felt very convicted that if we put out great technology, if we focus on quality, right, and we try to make things super simple, like make life easier for anybody that needs to in their job to use our technology versus somebody else's, then we will win, customer by customer over time and retain them. Um, so, but that's the first question everybody asks. You show up like, well, what's different?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, oh, well, I mean, I don't know that I'm doing it. I don't know, but like, I don't care. It's actually more
Yeah.
risky. Um,
No, but to have those like very specific three tenants makes a lot of sense. And I feel, people could probably digest that pretty easily to understand why that's important for this particular business. It sounds like it took a year, less than a year to get the product ready to go. Is that right?
yeah, so it was MVP ready for the minimal viable product around October 2016, and the big press release, like, okay, because we were operating quietly. I didn't want everybody to know what's going on because I didn't have anything to sell.
Mm.
So launched in 2016, and it was indeed an MVP. Like it was minimally viable, and honestly, from that point forward, actually, I raised a little bit of money from not institutions but strategics, other companies in the industry, because over the course of 15 years, or I built credibility and worked with some people.
Yeah.
I raised what's called a Series A with strategics, and it was $1.5 million. I was like, okay, I can go hire people. I can actually like do this stuff. Still wasn't really paying myself, but it was like that's okay. Um, and then start hiring like first like commercial people that I worked with in the industry that knew them from before. Started, traveling to try and sell and like get people to use it. And exciting time. But I always describe the October 2016 for probably almost the next 12 to 18 months. Those were the hardest times, because after you've like prepped for going to market and you're like, well, of course, everybody's going to be so excited. They're just going to buy from us. Like, we're going to be like, how do we take all these orders?
Yes.
Like, I'm not even sure QuickBooks can do this many invoices, right?
Sure. Which I appreciate
So
that optimism. I love that.
it didn't go that way. It
Okay.
was really, really, really hard, and our sales were pretty modest in the
Okay.
first 12 months, and we were burning cash, and we
Mm.
were, you know, and that's everybody always asks me like, what's the number one rule of success in a startup?
Yeah.
And it's super simple: don't run out of money.
Mm. Which is challenging too. Simple idea, challenging to accomplish. I
I mean,
understand.
that's how businesses go in business; they run out of money.
Right.
So, yeah, so it wasn't until like late like Q3 2017 where we felt like, okay, things are starting
Yeah.
to work, and we were kind of off to the races after that.
Okay. I did hear a stat recently, like the 3-year mark of a startup. It's like if you can make it to 3 years, like you just got to keep going because then the pool of like remaining businesses is so much less who've like made it that far. So it sounds like you got there maybe a little bit earlier than that, but I can imagine that how getting to that place.
Yeah, I
And then
mean, it was probably from the if you say from the time where like the only thing I was doing was working on this business, right? That's probably January 1, 2016 or
yeah,
January 2, right? We were not out of the woods. And even in the end of 2017. So you're talking like 2 years before we're like me and the handful of people that work at the company where I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I think I think we've stopped the bleeding on cash. I
yeah,
think like this kind of bottomed out. I mean, we'd gone through most of the cash, right? There was maybe a few $100,000, $400,000 left, and we had some receivables and payables. And I was like, okay, I think we're good.
yeah.
But then you have to build up from that,
Right.
and there's just it's just so unknown, right? Like it's risky. Yeah, there's no other word to
Yeah, I was going to ask, I mean, so it's interesting too to come from such a like corporate background and to like have but I mean for different size companies, but coming from this like experience of being a leader at a larger scale to then being a startup entrepreneur, what has maybe surprised you the most about starting the business and that maybe you anticipated would happen and didn't, or vice versa?
it's hard to say, Christina. Mean, I literally just finished this trip where I'm visiting every office around the world.
Yeah.
And now we have 254 employees around the world. We have
Wow.
offices here, plus another 40 people remotely in the US. We have a UK office, and we have people in Germany. We have people, we have 32 people in Brazil. We have 125 in India. We have, people that work in Australia, people that work in Singapore. And so the trip that I do, which is just an annual kickoff, right? The usual, like, hey, this is how we did last year. Congratulations. This is the plan for this year. This is the goal for this year. And, you get all the, if somebody asked me, because in India, that's our largest population. We have a lot of different functions that work there. And somebody said, like, did you imagine that this would be like this?
Right.
And the short answer is yes, I did. Because I'd been at companies to see how they get to scale. I imagined it, right? But once you've actually gone through the process and you realize just how hard it is to be successful at each phase. Like if you were to, if this was, you dropped me in to this company, from 10 years ago, right now, I would be overwhelmed. I'd be like, oh my gosh, what do I do about all these people here and there? But
Yeah.
everything has been incremental. It went
Right.
from me to 10 people to 20 people plus the beginning of a UK office, and then this office. And even the blessing of, in 2020 was actually good for our industry. 2021 was great for our industry. 22, 23 were kind of like rough in the data industry.
Hmm.
And we didn't grow to our expectations, which means we also didn't hire the way that we had hired in years prior. And I'm very much always like, I know people say, oh, you learn so much from failure. I'm like, I just learn from experience,
Hmm.
right? And I really felt like I got to like grow into my clothes of
Yeah.
like, okay, this is a 200-person company, but we stayed a 200-person company for almost a year and a half. Right? There
Right.
wasn't a lot of like if we, so all of this is kind of like it's just happened slowly over time,
Yeah.
and like, okay, I understand this. Um, and so it is the vision of where I could see it getting to. It's still an overwhelming emotion, right? Because there's so many people that take care of their families, right? Their livelihoods, because they're all talented. If something went wrong here, I'm sure almost everybody would have a job in 2 days and be working somewhere else. But we really focus on having a really strong company culture, and people want to work here. We have very strong retention. We're very selective of who we hire here. And and it matters to me when you visit them and they're like, thank you, or like, hey, this is like, think of this, like so many people I've worked with, many of them were, young, wild, and free, and now they're married and have their first kids or second kids.
Yeah.
And to be able to be with people, growing their careers, growing personally, creating families, what a rewarding journey to be able to do.
I can imagine. It gives me little chills too, because for you to approach your people like that, and I know that that's an important part of how you run it is the people behind it, and thinking about that. And unfortunately, not a lot of businesses take that perspective, or at least not to real heart. It might be sort of on the shinier side, but like to actually care and have those like personal relationships, and even that you're taking this global trip annually to visit all of your various locations. I mean, that requires a lot of effort too, and a lot of desire to like really connect with people.
Yeah. Well, if you can get your culture right, and I don't really think this needs to be like in a big company, or it can be a local company, it can be a restaurant, a store, right? If you align the culture, right? And the thing is, culture is not about how people feel. It's not about having nap pods. It's not about having rosé on tap, right? Those are little fun things that you can do, but to really, like, we put culture front and center of like, all right, like, what is it that we stand for? Like everything we do, let's do it great,
Yeah.
right? And we say like, all right, so we call it PSX, Pure Spectrum Experience. Like when somebody joins our company, we need to make sure the experience, their first day, their first week, right? And these are things that I had no history doing, but like it
Yeah.
just kind of came over time. Like, all right, how do we make sure that joining this company has an experience,
That's fantastic.
right? And then when we're dealing with our customers, like how's that experience need to be like tight and perfect, and always improving, and adapt to the ways that things need to happen. And then if you can get everybody, like, to be like, all right, it's not just a job, right? Like we're here to do something and do it a certain way. Look at very successful professional sports franchises. They all have I'm not a Patriots fan, but like dominant, right? They're like the Patriot way,
Yeah.
right? Everything they do it to a certain standard, certain way. And I respected that. I was like, all right, how do you adapt that into, this sort of company? I just feel like it's so important. And I think people are self-selecting, right? They're like, all right, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so like we have a pretty good track record of attracting good talent. So we
Well, and especially for a technology company, that's even more important, I think. Especially from my understanding, when it comes to developers or like the tech folks, like you have to, they're able to consider a lot of that too, in terms of like where they want to end up, just because they have a skill that is really desirable, but also like they, trying to balance the desire of what the people side of it is too.
give and a take.
Yeah. So your headquarters is based in the Conejo Valley, and it's
Correct.
actually in the same building as Hub 101. So what a
We
full
did not we did
circle
not move far from Hub 101. We're
moment. That's
upstairs.
incredible. Upstairs from Hub 101. I love that. How did you decide to have the headquarters here? And are there any advantages of being based out of the Conejo
Sorry,
Valley?
still recovering here. Well, when I started the business, everybody said, "Oh, you have to, if you're going to be doing a tech company, you have to be doing this down in Santa Monica."
Mhm.
And I was like, I live in Oak Park. I really do not want to drive down there every day. Also, didn't. It's really hard to compete for the tech talent. You have some pretty well-funded large companies down there. So I was resolute. I was like, this business is going to be built in the Conejo Valley
Mm.
because I don't want to drive to LA every day. That's not the only reason.
You
But
know what? You gotta
also,
have at least one, and that's a good one to start with.
no, that was like I did not want to drive to LA. And the other was, I have young children. They're older now. One is actually goes to Kowloon now. He's a sophomore. I have a daughter who's a sophomore at Oaks and a sixth grader at Oaks. And I was like, you know what? I don't know how many places there are for talented young people when they finish college to come back and work in this area.
Yeah.
Um, and Now, listen, we're not going to be the largest employer in the Conejo Valley. It's just not going to be the case. But we have a lot of people who, they when they finish college, they come back and they're looking for jobs around here, and this is a place where we tend to hire most of our talent coming out of college. They're like, yep, you can be back in this area. So there was, the I'm not going to move, and I'm not going to drive. And then, is it possible to create opportunities for 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, where other people's kids can work at a company here? But
Yeah.
there's tons of great companies around here that they can also go to. But I'd like to see more.
Yeah, I think that that is a great way to look at it. It's like building the community you want, not only for yourself, but for future generations. And I think that that's a really interesting perspective. Is like, how do you make not only a Conejo Valley a great place to live physically because of the weather, the outdoors, but also to be able to work here too. So you're not commuting and you're able to spend more time with your family. I think those are very important things.
We've had a lot of success with people that are probably like 10 years in their career, that do have kids, that have been commuting down to Westwood or otherwise, that they're like, this is great. Like, I can live in the Conejo Valley and I can work in the Conejo Valley and I can go to my kids, lacrosse game or soccer game,
Yeah.
and I don't have to leave at 1. I can leave at 2:45 for a 3:15 game to do
Right.
that.
Right.
So yeah, it's a little bit of both. And then it's, even though, again, we probably only have 42, 43 people that are in this office, um, but they, like, a lot of these people are getting to travel the world.
Yeah.
Like they're doing trips to India and to Singapore, and not all of them, right? Just role dependent in what they
Yeah.
do. But and there's also, even if you're not traveling there, like, I think there's something really cool to, you can work at a company and have colleagues in Sydney and Singapore and Brazil, and we really try to make sure everybody gets the opportunity to know each other. But the opening up of the world to, because I'm just a dumb hick from the South, right? Like, I didn't even know, like, what this stuff was when I was 25 years old.
Yeah, well,
So
right. It's a global organization and you got to have like the benefits of being here, but also like a world touch. And that is really awesome. And that's really a cool opportunity to give people and be able to like lead and have that opportunity given to others. That's really great. I was going to ask, what are you most proud of?
uh, it's really about how many different people from around the world can take care of themselves, their
Yeah.
families, can advance their careers. It's about the people, right? I mean, we've done some real cool revenue milestones. This last year we surpassed $300 million in lifetime revenue, which is like, whoa, that's super cool. And then
Yeah.
this year, like, we'll do over 100 just in this year. Like, it's just build, build, build. Um, and it's just that's kind of cool. It's like, all right, like, this is a legit business, and
Yeah.
there's those parts, but I love the people, right? I love the career growth and getting to know people, and seeing, hanging out with them,
Yeah. I love
going to
that.
battle.
What has been the biggest challenge?
Oh, the people. Um, the biggest challenge. I mean, there's every year presents an opportunity and a challenge that were completely and totally unexpected.
Hmm.
2020 hits. Like, you have to adapt to, okay, now everybody has to be remote, and then not just remote here, but remote in India, remote in here. Like, okay, whoa, like on a dime. And people dealing with some real, sad losses in the company. But I can literally go every year and be like, there's some major sideswipe surprise that we never saw coming, that we're convinced would kill us. And then some other thing that we're like, I had no idea this amazing opportunity was going to show up. Like, this wasn't in the budget, and this
Mhm.
customer wasn't in our right. So I just go through life expecting my data, like, that I do not know what it is, but something's going to be really hard. and there's going to be something that's going to be really good.
Mhm.
And every time those things happen, I want to be able to think about like, okay, like how could we prevent that in the future, and how can we learn from that, and then how do you be grateful? Right? I'm super grateful for every time something that unexpected bad happens, which is
Mm.
just a weird thing. Where I'm like, all right, listen, we survived that, we learned from that, and like this, how much did we learn from that?
Mhm.
All right, like we just like literally had a major customer that we won, but we didn't like get like podium position with. And the reason why was because our API documentation was too robust. There was too many offerings on it. And they're going to integrate with the other much younger, more nimble company first, because we're like, yeah, it's because they haven't been around, and it's super, like they don't have all the features we do. Like, look at all our features, look at all this,
Yeah.
right? And then I'm like, okay, what did we just learn, right? That more is not always better. Like
Mm.
this
Mhm.
customer, even though it's still going to be a customer, like that we never went through the proper discovery of like, well, show us how you intend to interact with our
Yeah.
APIs.
Wow.
Okay, great. Let us show you exactly the minimal amount that you need to do to be successful with our APIs and how easy that would be.
Right.
And we're just like, look, like you can do 50 things on our API, right?
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
I don't know. So it's hard to
No,
say
and
like
great
there's
to, like, be
one,
able to have the awareness of that, though, and be able to take a step back. Because having, when you get to a certain size, I can imagine you say, "Well, that doesn't matter," but to be able
it's
to.
like having it like when a menu's too big at a restaurant.
Yes.
I'm
Right.
like, this, I can't even order
It's
here.
overwhelming. Mhm.
I'm going to In and Out.
Yeah.
There's three offers.
Decision fatigue, right, you don't want
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, being able to, like, adjust, and like you said, it kinda sounds like you've taken each moment very incrementally, and that you've been able to grow alongside of it too, so you're able to maybe see it in a with an awareness of each of the individual issues while also thinking on a macro
It is
level.
a journey,
Yeah.
right? And anybody that's like thinks about like some like finish line, that's life's joke.
Mm.
There is only one finish line, and that's when
Mhm.
it's over, right?
Mhm.
But everything's just another lap. It's just another time around the track, right? And it's like, and if you cannot get down with the concept that everything is just another part of the journey, another lap, then you will go mad.
Mm.
And it takes a while to kind of get that, you know, I mean, it's not like I
Perspective.
was born
Yeah.
knowing that, right? It's developed over time, my understanding. But to be able to enjoy that journey and to be aware of that human situation is
Yeah.
helpful.
What's your vision for Pure Spectrum?
I still like running the business. People ask me that all the time. We have a lot of new things that we are playing with. There's now AI is a big part of the business prospects, both opportunities and probably threats that we need to consider, and what that's going to do for our world. I think it's more opportunity than threat. I It's probably like we can go two paths. One is continue incremental, like we like to grow. Working at a growing company is fun for everybody,
Mhm.
um, and we're accelerating our growth. It's like really starting to click even more now, like compounding. And then we could go down a path of starting to, buy companies and merge them together. And both of those are very valid options. We've done a few acquisitions before, and they've gone pretty well, but nothing transformative.
Okay.
And everybody's always here like, do something transformative, like do something really big. And it's funny now because like I took so much risk 10 years ago. And I'm like, oh, that sounds so risky, right? It's like, oh, you just jeopardize your whole family's livelihood to start a business. Now you might upset some banker. Um, so I
All
just,
about perspective, right? And
I
like
know,
context of
right? Got
what's
to protect
happening.
all
That's
this now.
interesting. Yes.
So yeah, I think until it's like we are very diligent in setting a plan for a year, and to manage the business to a plan, and to make all the investments to a plan, and we have exciting things we're doing this year,
Cool.
and it's a fun exercise to say like, what's good, what are we going to do 5 years from now? I think that's just not that realistic to
Yeah.
think that far in the future. I think like 1 to 3 years is normal. maybe you can do that. Um, so keep running it,
Yeah.
right? And keep trying to make it a good business and grow. And as long as I feel like I'm still the guy that can do it, I'll keep running it. And then if not, I'll try and find someone else to help run it. But we're
Amazing.
not there yet. I'm still the guy, I think.
Yes, you're still the guy. 10 years. Well, that's a big milestone this year. So or I guess, yeah, this year.
It's coming. Yeah.
Yes.
This December. Yeah. We'll probably
Okay.
make a big deal of it. I think so.
I love that. You should. You definitely deserve it. Okay, I have two quick rapid fire questions for you. First of all, what is your favorite thing to do in the Conejo Valley?
Golf.
Do you have a favorite place to golf? Golf course, I
Yeah.
guess is as they call
Yeah.
it.
No, I belong to North Ranch Country Club. All right. So I know that's super specific. I do love to play golf. I did not make it professionally, obviously. But I still like to play. Um, I love to. North Ranch Country Club. We got a ton of great friends. Enjoy getting out in the weekends and maybe even on a Friday afternoon from time to time. Founder benefit after all
Yeah.
these years to be able to have afternoons to do that. Um, we're not big ocean goer like beach, which I know is like over the hill. It's just so sandy and I don't know, like I just like to be out here. Like I just think it's nice here. I like our little bubble. We all know it's the bubble, right? We call it the bubble.
Yes.
I don't like to go south of Calabasas unless I have to. You know, Thousand Oaks, Newbury Park's kind of the extent of how. So
Fair
it's
enough.
just nice out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is one piece of advice you would give to a first time entrepreneur?
Don't run out of money for one. That is actually a jokingly, but like make sure you have enough money to do what you're trying to do
Mm.
because you can really put a lot of money to work. And if you don't have enough, right, then like it all goes to nothing. Like you can't do it without money. So as you're building a plan for something you want to do, make sure that you personally can go long enough without making a paycheck. You have adequate capital. And for us, ours is relatively capital intensive to build out technology. Um, but like that like you will not make as much money in revenue and profits as you imagine in your first couple of years. It's not going to happen. If you do, like, you're lucky, right? So you need to, whatever your revenue projections are, cut them at least in half, right? Whatever your cost projections are, at least double them. This is like worse than remodeling a home. And just before you make that leap, like make sure that you've covered off on that, and then you got a shot, right? Because if you can get to that 2-3 year mark and get your product market fit and start to build it, then so long as you don't mess up along the way, then you have a real shot at success in that. But when companies run out of money, like it is game over. They're like, oh, I should, and then they've spent all the money, and they like you'll learn, right? But like that's my number one thing. Is the money is the number one thing.
I think that's an important lesson, not only in business but in life, probably, and one that we have to be very honest about. So, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for all of your time. I took a lot of it, but what a great story! And congratulations on 10 years and building an incredible headquarters out here in the Conejo Valley, and giving opportunities to folks to enjoy the lifestyle here, but also working for a really great tech company. So, congratulations on all of that.
All right, thanks for the time, Christina.
Thank you for listening to Conejo Valley Visionaries. If you like today's episode, make sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to rate and review us. That's the best way to support the podcast. To enter our giveaways, learn about local events, and to find out more about each guest, follow at Conejo Valley Visionaries on Instagram. If you want to share your visionary story on the podcast, send us an email. We are always open to guest nominations. Email conejovalleyvisionaries@gmail.com. This episode was produced by Christina Denstead and Justin K. Sloan. Conejo Valley Visionaries is edited by Justin K. Sloan and J. Sloan Productions.